When logic crosses galaxies, the impossible becomes reality. The cold void of space trembles as a mind unlike any in the Empire awakens aboard a derelict ship. The Vulcan's mental barriers stand firm against the dark probing of Imperial Inquisitors, his calculating intellect a mystery that both Sith and Jedi find impossible to penetrate. In this galaxy, emotions fuel the Force, but what happens when pure reason challenges the very foundations of power that have ruled for 1,000 generations? Can Spock's disciplined mind unlock a balance that neither Jedi nor Sith have ever achieved? The frozen void of space carried no sound as the derelict vessel drifted silently through the outer rim. Its hull bore unfamiliar markings, neither Imperial nor Republic in origin. The stars of an unknown galaxy reflected against its metallic surface, illuminating damage that spoke of a journey beyond comprehension. Inside the vessel, environmental systems barely functioned, their dying power casting intermittent red light across the command deck where a lone figure lay motionless. Commander Spock opened his eyes to darkness and silence, his logical mind immediately cataloging his surroundings. The transporter malfunction had been catastrophic. By all scientific principles he understood, his presence here defied explanation. As he rose to his feet, the ship groaned beneath him, a vessel not designed for the strange physics of this realm. Through the viewport, 3 moons hung in impossible proximity around a scarred planet. Spock raised an eyebrow. Fascinating. The universe had presented him with a puzzle beyond the scope of Vulcan science. The emergency systems of the strange vessel provided minimal data. The star charts matched nothing in his memory. The quantum signature of nearby celestial bodies operated on principles foreign to Federation physics. Spock allowed himself exactly 3 minutes and 27 seconds to process this information before turning his attention to immediate survival. The transporter incident had torn a hole in reality itself. Captain Kirk and the Enterprise were beyond reach. Logic dictated he accept these circumstances and proceed accordingly. He gathered what functioning equipment remained, including his tricorder and phaser, both exhibiting unusual power fluctuations in this strange environment. The comm system produced only static, though Spock detected patterns suggesting artificial transmissions nearby. As he recalibrated the sensors, a surge of energy approached the vessel at impossible speed. The readings defied categorization, some form of propulsion technology operating on principles his instruments could not analyze. The deck beneath him trembled as something locked onto the hull. Spock heard the unmistakable sound of metal being cut through. Intruders. He positioned himself strategically, phaser ready, though set to stun. His Vulcan hearing detected multiple beings moving with practiced coordination. The bulkhead or door sparked and then collapsed inward. White-armored figures stormed through the opening, weapons raised. Their helmets concealed all facial features, giving them an appearance of mechanical uniformity. Behind them came a figure in black, radiating an authority that required no insignia or announcement. The air around this being seemed to distort, as though reality itself bent in their presence. "Secure the anomaly," the dark figure commanded, voice distorted through a mask that reflected the emergency lights in ominous crimson. "Lord Vader will want this one alive." Spock observed the efficient manner in which the soldiers established a perimeter. Their weapons technology appeared to be plasma-based, capable of considerable damage, yet remarkably inefficient in design. The dark figure approached, and Spock felt something unprecedented, a pressure against his consciousness, probing and invasive. His Vulcan mental disciplines responded automatically, establishing barriers that caused the dark figure to stop abruptly. "Fascinating," the masked being said. "You resist the Force." "I am unfamiliar with that designation," Spock replied evenly. "I am Commander Spock of the USS Enterprise. I appear to have been transported to your galaxy through means I cannot yet explain. I assure you I intend no hostile action." The dark figure circled him slowly. The pressure against Spock's mind continued, more forceful now. "Your mind is unlike any I have encountered, human, yet not, emotional, yet contained." The Emperor will be most interested in how you block my probes so effortlessly. I am Vulcan, Spock clarified. We are taught from childhood to control our emotions through logical discipline. A low laugh emerged from behind the mask. Logic. How limited. You have no concept of the power that flows through all living things. Your discipline is impressive, but ultimately futile against the dark side of the Force. The stormtroopers approached with restraints. Spock calculated his options. Resistance would be illogical against such numbers. He allowed himself to be secured, observing everything with careful attention. The architecture of the vessel that now engulfed his small craft was enormous beyond reason, a monument to militaristic excess. Through viewports he glimpsed the vastness of space and a fleet of similar triangular ships positioned in formation. An empire indeed, one built on domination and fear if the rigid hierarchy he observed was any indication. They led him to a detention cell where energy fields hummed with lethal potential. The dark figure, who had identified himself only as the Inquisitor, observed Spock with predatory interest. Your species would be of great value to the Empire. Beings naturally resistant to the Jedi mind trick, capable of suppressing emotion in favor of cold calculation. Perfect servants for the Emperor. I serve the United Federation of Planets, Spock replied, and your assessment of Vulcan culture is incomplete. We do not suppress emotion because we lack it. We choose discipline precisely because our emotions run deeper than humans can comprehend. The Inquisitor leaned forward. Then we are not so different. The dark side channels passion into power. Perhaps you could be trained rather than simply studied. I have observed that those who equate power with purpose rarely question the morality of their actions, Spock said. A most illogical position. Anger flared visibly in the Inquisitor, and Spock felt the pressure against his mind intensify dramatically. The cell itself seemed to vibrate with tension. Vulcan mental disciplines held, but not without effort. The Inquisitor stepped back, surprise evident even through the mask. Prepare him for transfer to Coruscant, the Inquisitor commanded the stormtroopers. Lord Vader will want to conduct the interrogation personally. Alone in the cell, Spock entered a meditative state, organizing his observations and preparing for what logic dictated would be a difficult encounter. This force the Inquisitor wielded appeared to be some form of psychic energy, perhaps drawing on the quantum field in ways Federation science had yet to discover. If he could understand its properties, he might find a way to return to his own universe. More immediately, he needed to assess the political situation he had been drawn into. The militaristic nature of his captors suggested an authoritarian regime. Their references to resistance implied an ongoing conflict. Spock had no desire to become entangled in another galaxy's civil war, but neutrality might not be an option. The journey to Coruscant provided Spock with his first view of this galaxy's center of power. The planet before him was entirely urbanized, its natural surface completely obscured beneath layers of architecture spanning millennia. Even Vulcan, with its ancient civilization, had maintained the sacred deserts and mountains. This world had surrendered entirely to artifice, a monument to sentient domination over nature. The logical inefficiency of such development was evident even to a casual observer. As the shuttle descended through layers of traffic that moved in complex, interwoven patterns, Spock noted the stark stratification of the structures. Wealth and power concentrated visibly toward the upper levels, while darkness claimed the depths. Their destination rose above all else, a monolithic structure of sharp angles and imposing facades. The Imperial Palace, as his guards named it, dominated the horizon, its scale designed specifically to diminish those who approached. A calculated psychological tactic, Spock noted. Efficient, if somewhat obvious. They led him through corridors lined with red-robed guards whose discipline impressed even him. Their stillness suggested training beyond standard military protocols. The throne room itself was an exercise in negative space, the vast emptiness broken only by a raised dais and the solitary figure seated upon it. Emperor Palpatine did not rise as they entered. His face remained shadowed within the hood of his robe, but Spock felt the weight of his gaze immediately. The pressure against his mind returned, no longer a probe, but a sustained assault that required Spock to employ his deepest mental disciplines to withstand. Beside the Emperor stood the imposing figure he had heard referenced. Darth Vader towered in black armor, the rhythmic sound of his breathing apparatus marking time in the silent chamber. The Emperor's laugh was soft yet filled the room. "The Vulcan resists," Palpatine observed. "Most interesting. Your mind is a fortress, Commander Spock. Built on foundations of logic and discipline. Admirable, but ultimately misguided." "I find that conclusion presumptuous given your limited data regarding Vulcan philosophy," Spock replied. The Emperor leaned forward, his face catching the light to reveal features ravaged by corruption. "You stand before the Master of the Sith, an order that has studied the Force for 1,000 generations. Your accidental arrival presents a unique opportunity. A being from beyond our galaxy, naturally resistant to Force suggestion, yet clearly sensitive to its currents." "I have encountered many species with telepathic abilities," Spock said. "Your Force appears to be a similar phenomenon, though the metaphysical framework you have constructed around it seems unnecessarily mystical." Vader stepped forward at this, the temperature in the room seeming to drop with his movement. "You understand nothing of the Force. It is not merely telepathy. It is the energy that binds the galaxy together, that flows through all living things." "An interesting hypothesis," Spock acknowledged. "On Vulcan, we might have examined such claims through rigorous scientific inquiry rather than religious devotion." The Emperor laughed again, clearly amused by the exchange. "Lord Vader, our visitor requires a demonstration. Perhaps then he will appreciate the limitations of his logic when confronted with the power of the dark side." Vader extended a hand. Spock felt pressure around his throat, constricting despite the absence of physical contact. His Vulcan physiology allowed him to endure without oxygen longer than a human, but the sensation was most uncomfortable. He maintained eye contact with Vader, refusing to struggle against the invisible grip. The pressure released suddenly. "Impressive control," Vader acknowledged. Few maintain such composure during their first experience with the Force choke. "Violence as demonstration indicates intellectual insecurity," Spock observed, his voice unchanged despite the assault. "A confident position requires no such validation." The Emperor rose from his throne, moving with deliberate slowness. "Your arrival coincides with a most fortuitous moment in galactic history, Commander. The last of the Jedi have been hunted to near extinction. Their flawed understanding of the Force will soon be forgotten, but your unique mental architecture presents an intriguing question. Could a mind so disciplined, yet untrained in the Force, provide insights that have eluded both Sith and Jedi?" "I have no interest in assisting an authoritarian regime," Spock stated plainly. "My observations suggest your empire maintains order through fear rather than consent, a system that is inherently unstable and illogical for long-term governance." The Emperor circled Spock slowly. "You misjudge us, Commander. The Empire brought peace to a galaxy torn by endless war. The Republic that preceded us was weak, corrupt, paralyzed by its own bureaucracy. We imposed necessary order." "I find that history is rarely so conveniently simplified," Spock replied, "particularly when narrated by those currently in power." A flash of anger crossed the Emperor's face, quickly controlled. "Your cooperation is preferred but not required. Lord Vader will escort you to our research facility. Your mind will be studied and your biology examined. The secrets of Vulcan discipline will serve the Empire, whether willingly offered or forcibly extracted." As they led Spock from the throne room, he calculated his diminishing options. His captors possessed technology and abilities beyond his immediate understanding. Escape seemed improbable without additional data. For now, observation remained his most logical course. The research facility they brought him to was clinically precise, staffed by beings who regarded him with scientific detachment. They confiscated his remaining equipment, showing particular interest in his tricorder and communicator. Spock watched as Imperial scientists attempted to access the devices, their frustration evident as they encountered Federation encryption protocols. Days passed in a sterile chamber where droids and scientists subjected him to a battery of tests. They scanned his brain activity as he performed Vulcan meditative techniques. They measured his physical capabilities, expressing surprise at his superior strength and stamina. Through it all, Spock gathered information, building a mental map of the facility, noting security protocols and personnel rotations. The Force users occasionally observed these sessions, their presence always accompanied by the familiar pressure against his consciousness. Spock began to theorize that this force was indeed tied to midi-chlorians, as he had overheard the scientists discuss, microscopic life forms that appeared to exist in a symbiotic relationship with sentient cells. A biological basis for what these people considered mystical power. Fascinating, if true. On the 7th day of his captivity, the routine changed. The security presence doubled. The scientists cleared the laboratory. Vader entered, accompanied by a protocol droid carrying equipment Spock had not previously observed. "Your resistance continues to impress, Commander," Vader said, "but today we will determine the true limits of Vulcan discipline." The device they attached to Spock's temples hummed with power. Its purpose became clear when the first surge of energy disrupted his neural pathways, temporarily overwhelming his mental barriers. Spock focused on his training, compartmentalizing the pain, isolating it from his cognitive functions. Vader observed closely, the expressionless mask revealing nothing of his thoughts. "The Emperor believes your mind contains secrets valuable to the Empire," Vader said. "I suspect your value lies elsewhere. You are sensitive to the Force, though untrained. I can feel your potential." "An interesting conjecture," Spock managed, his voice steady despite the neural disruptor. "Though I note a certain hierarchical tension between your assessment and your Emperor's instructions." Vader increased the intensity of the device. "The Emperor sees tools. I see possibilities. Your universe exists beyond our knowledge. Your Federation operates on principles foreign to our Empire. Tell me of your world, Vulcan." Through carefully controlled breaths, Spock maintained his focus. Vulcan was a harsh desert world orbiting a red giant star. Our civilization chose logic over emotion after nearly destroying ourselves through uncontrolled warfare. We found strength in reason, progress in discipline. "And yet you serve alongside humans on this enterprise," Vader pressed. "Humans who embrace their emotions, who act on instinct and passion. Diversity of perspective enhances problem-solving capacity," Spock replied. "Captain Kirk often reaches correct conclusions through intuitive leaps I would not have considered. I provide balance through logical analysis." The neural disruptor shut down suddenly. Vader stepped closer. Balance, an interesting choice of words. The Jedi spoke often of bringing balance to the Force, though they never truly understood what that meant. "I find that single-perspective orthodoxies rarely comprehend the totality of complex systems," Spock observed. "The universe seldom conforms to absolutist frameworks." Vader was silent for a long moment, the only sound his mechanical breathing. "You will be transferred tomorrow. The Emperor has ordered your transport to a secure facility on Mustafar. Few return from that place with their minds intact." Spock raised an eyebrow. "You provide this information despite knowing I might use it to attempt escape. Curious." "The Force moves in ways even I cannot always predict," Vader replied. "Perhaps it has brought you here for purposes beyond the Emperor's understanding. Rest while you can, Vulcan. Tomorrow will test the limits of your vaunted logic." When Vader departed, Spock immediately entered a Vulcan healing trance to repair the neural damage from the interrogation. The information about his impending transfer provided a deadline. Escape must be attempted tonight, despite incomplete data and unfavorable odds. As his body healed, his mind processed every observation, every conversation, constructing and discarding potential strategies until a single viable plan remained. Success was unlikely but not impossible. The question of where he would go after escaping remained unanswered, but immediate freedom was a logical prerequisite to finding a way home. Night Cycle brought reduced staffing but increased automated security. Spock had observed the patrol patterns of both guards and droids. Timing would be essential. The neural disruptor had weakened his mental barriers temporarily, but it had also provided insight into the technology this empire employed. Vulcans were touch telepaths by nature, but Spock's exposure to the Force had heightened his awareness of the energy fields these people manipulated. He closed his eyes, focusing not on escaping his restraints, but on sensing the currents around him. For 2.4 minutes, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, Spock felt the mechanism of his restraints through an awareness beyond physical touch. The logical part of his mind noted the Psalmic impossibility of what he was attempting. The scientific part theorized about quantum entanglement and psychic resonance. Both were silenced as the lock clicked open. Fascinating. The Force, it seemed, responded to disciplined intention as readily as it did to emotion. Moving silently, Spock navigated the facility using his eidetic memory. 2 guards fell to the Vulcan nerve pinch before they could sound alarms. A maintenance shaft provided access to the laboratory where his equipment was stored. The scientists had disabled his communicator, but not his phaser, apparently unable to determine its power source. Spock reclaimed both devices. The tricorder immediately proved useful, its sensors detecting the unique energy patterns of nearby Force users. He would need to avoid them at all costs. The spaceport adjacent to the facility presented both opportunity and risk. Security was highest there, but so too was his best chance of acquiring transportation off the planet. Spock calculated the optimal approach, factoring in guard rotations and automated systems. A maintenance uniform provided adequate disguise for initial infiltration. His tricorder identified a small courier vessel with minimal crew requirements and sufficient range to reach the outer rim. The ship manifest indicated scheduled departure within the hour. Timing, as always, would be critical. Spock was 3 meters from the ship when he sensed a familiar presence. The Inquisitor emerged from the shadows, lightsaber igniting with a sinister hum. The Emperor foresaw your escape attempt, Vulcan. Your predictable logic made you easy to anticipate. If I were being entirely predictable, Spock replied calmly, I would not have evaded detection until now. The Inquisitor lunged forward, the lightsaber cutting through the air where Spock had stood a moment before. Vulcan reflexes and strength provided advantages, but the Inquisitor wielded the Force with practiced skill. Objects flew toward Spock from multiple angles. He dodged with precision, his movements economical and calculated. The phaser provided momentary advantage, its beam catching the Inquisitor by surprise. But the Dark Force user deflected subsequent shots with the lightsaber blade, advancing steadily. Spock found himself cornered, the hangar bay exit sealed behind him. The Inquisitor approached slowly, savoring the moment. Your discipline is impressive, but ultimately futile. The Force will always triumph over mere logic. I have found that those who speak in absolutes, Spock observed, often do so to avoid confronting the complexity of reality. The Inquisitor's lightsaber raised for a final strike. Then, without warning, the weapon flew from his grasp, clattering across the hangar floor. The Inquisitor turned in shock as a new figure entered, hand extended. Unlike the black-clad Imperials, this newcomer wore simple robes of brown and cream, an older human male with a neatly trimmed beard and watchful eyes. The Force had many aspects, the newcomer said. The narrow view of the Sith is but one interpretation. Jedi, the Inquisitor spat the word like a curse. You were wise to hide all these years, Kenobi, but your compassion has finally led you to your doom. Perhaps, the man called Kenobi acknowledged with surprising calm, or perhaps the Force has brought us together for reasons beyond our understanding. He turned to Spock. Commander, I believe you were seeking transportation off Coruscant. The Inquisitor called his lightsaber back to his hand with a gesture. igniting it alongside a second blade that extended from the opposite end of the hilt. Kenobi ignited his own weapon, a blue beam that hummed with a slightly different pitch. The two circled each other as Spock analyzed the tactical situation. The newcomer had intervened on his behalf, suggesting a potential ally, but his motives remained unknown. "I advise immediate departure," Spock said. "Security forces will respond to the disturbance within approximately 42 seconds. Kenobi nodded without taking his eyes from the Inquisitor. "The ship behind you is fueled and ready. The coordinates are already programmed. Go now, Commander. Our paths will cross again when the Force wills it." The logical choice was to accept the escape opportunity. Spock moved toward the ship, keenly aware of the battle commencing behind him. The lightsabers clashed with incredible energy, their wielders demonstrating physical abilities that defied standard humanoid limitations. The Force, it seemed, enhanced not just mental capacity but physical performance as well. Another variable to consider in his growing understanding of this universe's unique properties. As Spock powered up the small vessel, he observed through the viewport as Kenobi created an opening for his escape, using the Force to collapse a portion of the hangar ceiling between the Inquisitor and the departing ship. Alarms blared throughout the facility. Spock operated the controls with intuitive ease, finding the technology familiar enough despite its differences from Federation design. The ship lifted off as stormtroopers flooded the hangar, their blaster fire dissipating harmlessly against the vessel's shields. Coruscant fell away beneath him, the planetary defense systems already tracking his unauthorized departure. Larger Imperial vessels moved to intercept, but the small courier craft's speed and maneuverability provided temporary advantage. Spock studied the pre-programmed coordinates as he evaded pursuit. They led to a system at the edge of what the navigational computer designated as the Outer Rim. A substantial journey, but one the hyperdrive could apparently manage in a relatively short time. The pursuing ships were closing rapidly. Spock engaged the hyperdrive. Stars elongated around him as the ship leapt into hyperspace, a form of faster-than-light travel unlike the warp technology of the Federation. The physical sensations were distinct, suggesting a fundamentally different approach to overcoming the limitations of relativistic physics. Fascinating. Once the immediate danger of pursuit had passed, Spock turned his full attention to the ship's systems and the information they contained. The navicomputer identified his destination as the Dagobah system. Limited data was available, describing only an uninhabited world covered in swamps and forests, with no record of settlements or strategic value. A logical hiding place, perhaps, but an unlikely source of technology that might help him return to his universe. Still, the Jedi Kenobi had assisted his escape at considerable personal risk. Following the provided coordinates was the most reasonable course for now, particularly given his limited knowledge of this galaxy's political landscape and his lack of alternative destinations. The journey through hyperspace allowed Spock time to repair his communicator using tools from the ship's maintenance bay. Though he had no expectation of reaching the Enterprise across the dimensional barrier, the familiar technology provided a connection to his own reality. He also took the opportunity to study the ship's database, limited though it was. The historical records confirmed his observations about the Empire, detailing the fall of a republic and the rise of Emperor Palpatine amid a conflict called the Clone Wars. The Jedi Order, once peacekeepers of the Republic, had been declared traitors and systematically eliminated. The parallels to numerous historical patterns observed across the Federation were notable. Authoritarian regimes, Spock had found, often followed similar trajectories regardless of species or planetary origin. The ship reverted to real space with a subtle shudder, revealing a green world shrouded in clouds and mist. Sensors detected no technology, no settlements, no indication of sentient presence. Yet something about the planet registered uniquely on his tricorder. Energy patterns, unlike anything he had previously encountered, concentrated in specific regions of the surface. As Spock guided the ship through the atmosphere, visibility reduced dramatically. Fog enveloped the vessel, systems struggling to maintain navigational accuracy. The landing was more impact than controlled descent, the ship settling precariously amid the twisted roots of enormous trees rising from murky water. Spock emerged cautiously, tricorder scanning the surrounding swamp. The air was thick with humidity, rich with the scents of vegetation and decay. Life readings appeared in abundance, though none registered as immediately threatening. The energy patterns that had appeared on sensors were stronger now, emanating from a direction deeper into the swamp. Spock set out carefully, noting the unusual characteristics of the flora and fauna. Species that would have been remarkable on any Federation world seemed commonplace here, suggesting an ecosystem that had evolved with minimal outside interference for millions of years. He had traveled approximately 1 kilometer when his tricorder detected a small life form approaching, humanoid but diminutive, approximately 1 meter in height. Spock paused, waiting as the figure emerged from the mist. The being observed him with eyes that reflected wisdom beyond measure, ears pointed in a manner not dissimilar to Vulcan's, though his skin was green and wrinkled with extreme age. "Expected you, I did," the small being said, leaning on a gnarled cane. "When 900 years old you reach, sense many things you will." "Fascinating," Spock responded. "You appear to have been awaiting my arrival specifically, which suggests either precognitive abilities or communication with the individual who programmed my navigation coordinates." The ancient being chuckled. "Both, perhaps, or neither. Complicated the force is." He gestured for Spock to follow. "Come. Shelter. Food. Answers. Need these things, you do." Logic dictated caution, but Spock sensed no threat from the diminutive figure. He followed as the being led him through the swamp with surprising agility despite his apparent age. They arrived at a small dwelling built partially into the root system of a massive tree, its interior warm and surprisingly dry given the environment. The ceiling was too low for Spock to stand upright, requiring him to stoop as he entered. "Master Yoda, I am." The being introduced himself as he busied himself preparing a meal over a small fire. "The last of the Jedi Council, hiding, I have been since the Empire's rise. Waiting, I have been, for the right moment. I am Commander Spock of the USS Enterprise," Spock replied. "I appear to have been transported to your galaxy through a transporter malfunction. My immediate objective is to determine if a return to my universe is possible." Yoda nodded slowly. "Brought here by the Force you were. Purpose in all things there is, even those that seem like accidents. I find that attributing purpose to random quantum events is generally unsupported by empirical evidence," Spock observed. "However, I acknowledge that my understanding of this force's properties remains incomplete." The meal Yoda offered was simple but nutritious, a stew of local vegetation that Spock's tricorder confirmed as compatible with his physiology. As they ate, Yoda studied him with an intensity that reminded Spock of the Vulcan masters who had guided his early education. "Unusual you are," Yoda said finally. "Human appearance you have, but not human entirely. Emotions you possess, but control them with discipline few Jedi achieved. The Force you can feel, though untrained you are." "I am half Vulcan, half human," Spock explained. "I have chosen to follow the Vulcan path of logic and emotional control. As for this Force, I have indeed experienced its effects since arriving in your galaxy. It appears to share certain characteristics with telepathic abilities known in my universe, though its range of application seems considerably broader." Yoda closed his eyes, his expression one of deep concentration. "Strong mental barriers you have built. Protected you from the Emperor, they did, but limit your understanding, they also do." "My mental disciplines are the product of years of Vulcan training," Spock said. "They are fundamental to my identity and methodology. Abandon them, I do not ask," Yoda clarified. "Expand them, perhaps. The Force, not just telepathy it is. Life creates it, makes it grow. Energy surrounds us, binds us. Luminous beings are we, not this crude matter." He poked Spock's arm with his walking stick. An interesting philosophical position, Spock acknowledged. Though I note the practical applications of this force energy appear to have significant tactical advantages that suggest more than philosophical implications. Yoda sighed deeply. Always the way it is. Power they see, utility, control. The Sith, corrupted by this view they are. The Jedi, blinded by dogma they became. Balance, lost it was. Balance, Spock repeated. Vader used the same term. Yet from my observations, both sides appear to view this concept through the lens of absolutes, light versus dark. An oversimplification of complex phenomena, I would suggest. Yoda's eyes widened slightly. Perceptive you are. For centuries the Jedi believed balance meant elimination of the dark side. Wrong, we were. Afraid of darkness, we became. Denied its place in the natural order. On Vulcan, we acknowledge that emotions exist as biological realities, Spock said. We do not eliminate them, but rather channel them through logical frameworks. Perhaps your force's light and dark aspects require similar integration rather than opposition. The ancient Jedi Master regarded him thoughtfully. Different perspectives, the Force needs. Stagnant, the Jedi became. Rigid, contributed to our downfall. It did. He stood, moving to the doorway of his small home. Tomorrow, training begins. Not to make you a Jedi, but to help you understand what brought you here. What task the Force may have for you. I have no desire to become entangled in your galaxy's conflicts, Spock stated. My primary objective remains finding a method of return to my universe. Connected, these things may be, Yoda replied cryptically. Rest now. Answers will come when ready you are to hear them. The days that followed established a routine unlike any Spock had previously experienced. Each morning began with meditation, familiar to Spock in concept but radically different in execution. Where Vulcan meditation focused on ordering thoughts and suppressing emotional responses, Yoda's instructions encouraged awareness of the living energy surrounding them. Spock found the approach fascinating from a scientific perspective. The Force, as Yoda described it, functioned as a quantum field that connected all matter at a subatomic level, allowing those sensitive to its currents to perceive and influence physical reality through consciousness alone. Physical training followed meditation. Despite his advanced age, Yoda demonstrated remarkable agility and strength. He instructed Spock in movements designed to align his body with the Force's flow, exercises that seemed inefficient until Spock experienced their effects directly. His strength and reflexes, already superior to humans due to his Vulcan heritage, enhanced further when he allowed himself to sense the energy patterns Yoda identified. The most challenging aspects of training came when Yoda pushed him to expand his mental approach. Vulcan disciplines were based on suppressing emotion through logic. Yoda's teachings acknowledged emotions as part of the Force's natural current, neither suppression nor indulgence, but acceptance and direction. Spock found himself questioning fundamental aspects of Vulcan philosophy while simultaneously recognizing parallels in concepts of balance and harmony. Difficult for you, this is, Yoda observed on the seventh day as Spock attempted to lift a fallen log through force manipulation. Too much thought. Too little feeling. Vulcans have spent centuries developing mental disciplines specifically to control feeling, Spock replied, the log remaining stubbornly earthbound. Different, your galaxy is. Different challenges, different solutions. Yoda tapped his cane against the soft ground. But here, now, the Force requires balance, logic and emotion in harmony, not opposition. Spock considered this. A compromise in methodology may be logical given the different physical laws operating in this universe. He closed his eyes, maintaining his logical framework, but allowing himself to sense the connections between his consciousness and the objects around him. The log rose slowly, hovering a meter above the ground before settling back with precision. Fascinating. The implications for physics alone were worth detailed study. If consciousness could directly influence matter, at a quantum level, entire branches of science would require re-evaluation. As weeks passed, Spock's progress accelerated. His unique mental architecture, neither fully Jedi nor Sith in approach, allowed him to access aspects of the Force that Yoda found noteworthy. His telekinetic abilities remained limited compared to trained Force users, but his mind easily grasped complex energetic patterns. Particularly remarkable was his ability to sense disturbances across vast distances, what Yoda called shatter points in the Force's fabric. It was this ability that alerted Spock to an approaching presence one morning as he meditated at the edge of a murky pond. "Master Yoda," he called, using the title out of respect rather than formal acknowledgement of authority. A vessel approaches. Imperial design, though smaller than standard military craft. Yoda emerged from his dwelling, eyes closed in concentration. "Obi-Wan Kenobi, it is." And another. Strong in the Force, this one. The ship that descended through Dagobah's atmosphere navigated the difficult conditions with impressive skill, landing with minimal disturbance in a clearing near Yoda's home. Spock recognized the older human who emerged first as the Jedi who had facilitated his escape from Coruscant. Behind him came a younger human male, whose presence in the Force registered with unusual intensity despite his apparent lack of training. "Master Yoda." Kenobi bowed respectfully. "I apologize for disturbing your exile, but circumstances have forced our hand. The Empire has completed their weapon, the Death Star. Alderaan has been destroyed." Spock raised an eyebrow. "Destroyed? You are referring to a planetary body with presumably billions of inhabitants." "Obliterated," the younger human said, his voice tight with emotion. "The entire planet, gone in seconds. I felt it, somehow. Like millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced." "Felt it too, I did," Yoda confirmed solemnly. "A wound in the Force. Introduce yourself, young one." "Luke Skywalker," the youth said. "I was a moisture farmer on Tatooine until Imperial stormtroopers murdered my aunt and uncle. Ben has been teaching me about the Force, about my father." Spock noted a subtle tension between the older Jedi and Yoda at the mention of Luke's father. Interesting. The dynamic suggested information being withheld, perhaps for strategic purposes. Kenobi turned to Spock with evident curiosity. "The Force works in mysterious ways, Commander. When I helped you escape, I never imagined you'd find your way to Master Yoda. Has your time here been illuminating?" "It has provided substantial data regarding the physical properties of your Force's interaction with consciousness," Spock confirmed. "Master Yoda has been most informative regarding both practical application and philosophical frameworks." Luke studied Spock with open curiosity. "You're from another galaxy?" "Ben mentioned something about that, but I thought he might be speaking metaphorically." "I am from an alternate universe with different physical constants," Spock clarified. "The Federation spans a significant portion of what we call the Milky Way galaxy, encompassing hundreds of member worlds and species." Kenobi and Yoda exchanged glances that suggested meaningful communication beyond words. Spock had observed this silent exchange between Force users previously, a form of telepathic shorthand, efficiently transferring complex concepts without vocalization. Fascinating from both anthropological and neurological perspectives. "Tell them." "We should," Yoda said finally. "Connected these events are." Kenobi nodded, turning to Spock. "Commander, your arrival in our galaxy was not accidental. The Force sometimes creates connections across boundaries when great need arises. The Death Star represents a perversion of natural law, a weapon of such scale that it threatens not just lives but the fabric of the Force itself." "I fail to see how my reigned presence could influence such a situation," Spock said. "While I have learned to access certain Force abilities during my time here, I am hardly comparable to trained practitioners like yourselves." "Not your abilities," Yoda clarified. "Your perspective, your balance. Neither Jedi nor Sith are you, neither light nor dark. Logic and passion in harmony." Luke looked confused. "I thought the goal was to become a Jedi, to fight the dark side." "That thinking," Yoda tapped his cane for emphasis, led to the Jedi's destruction. Arrogance, certainty, balance, the Force seeks, always. The Emperor and Vader represent an extreme of dark side philosophy, Kenobi explained. But the Jedi of old, myself included, became rigid in our own way. We sought to eliminate the dark, rather than understand its place in the natural order. Spock considered this information with scientific detachment. You suggest that my hybrid nature, my experience balancing human emotion with Vulcan logic, provides a model for approaching your Force's dualistic aspects. An interesting hypothesis, though difficult to verify empirically. More than hypothesis, it is, Yoda insisted. The Force brought you here when needed most, when old ways have failed, when new perspective is required. Luke sat on a fallen log, visibly processing these revelations. But the Death Star is still out there. The rebellion has the plans, but time is running out. They're analyzing them for weaknesses at the base on Yavin 4s. And the Empire's forces will not be idle, Kenobi added. They will hunt for the rebellion with every resource at their disposal. Spock accessed the strategic situation with logical precision. Based on available data, a direct confrontation with a weapon capable of planetary destruction would be highly illogical given the rebellion's limited resources. Agreed, Kenobi said. But the rebellion will attempt it regardless. Hope is a powerful motivator, especially when alternatives appear non-existent. Then perhaps, Spock suggested, the optimal approach involves asymmetrical tactics rather than conventional military engagement. Yoda nodded approvingly. Think differently. We must. Failed. The old strategies have. Through the night, they strategized around the small fire in Yoda's dwelling. Spock found the experience reminiscent of planning sessions aboard the Enterprise, though the technology available was vastly different. Luke provided details of the Death Star's structure based on his brief exposure to the plans. Kenobi contributed knowledge of Imperial protocols and weaknesses. Yoda offered centuries of tactical wisdom. Spock applied Vulcan analytical methods to synthesize these diverse inputs into a coherent strategy. The optimal approach, Spock concluded as dawn broke through the mist, would involve a small team infiltrating the station to disable key systems before any larger military engagement. The probability of success remains low, but significantly higher than a conventional attack. Who would attempt such a mission? Luke asked. The station will be heavily guarded. Anyone Force-sensitive would be detected by Vader immediately. Not necessarily, Spock countered. My mental disciplines have proven effective at masking Force sensitivity from detection. With proper training, it may be possible to extend this protection to a small group. Kenobi stroked his beard thoughtfully. A shield of logic rather than Force concealment. Unexpected. Vader and the Emperor would be looking for traditional Jedi techniques. Never been attempted, such an approach has, Yoda said. But possible, it may be. Teach them. Can you, Spock? I can instruct in basic Vulcan mental disciplines, Spock confirmed. Though without years of training, the results will be incomplete. However, partial shielding combined with strategic timing might prove sufficient. The decision was made. They would depart for the rebel base on Yavin 4 immediately, where Spock would train a select team in Vulcan mental techniques, while the rebellion prepared for potential military engagement. The stolen Imperial shuttle provided adequate transport, though its identification codes would require updating to avoid immediate detection. As they prepared to leave, Yoda drew Spock aside. Changed, you have been, by your time here, expanded. When returned to your universe you do, take these lessons with you. The experience has provided valuable data regarding consciousness and its interaction with quantum fields, Spock acknowledged. The implications for Federation science are substantial. Yoda shook his head slightly. More than science, this is. Balance you have found, not Vulcan, not human, both and more. Remember this. The journey to Yavin 4 took them through carefully plotted hyperspace routes to avoid Imperial patrols. Kenobi used the time to continue Luke's training, focusing on lightsaber techniques and force awareness. Spock observed these sessions with scientific interest, noting the similarities and differences to Vulcan combat disciplines. He also began preparing mental exercises that might be taught to non-Vulcans in the limited time available. The rebel base on Yavin 4 operated from within an ancient temple structure, its stone mass providing natural shielding from Imperial scans. Their arrival caused immediate commotion, particularly when Kenobi explained Spock's extraterrestrial origins. The rebel leadership, headed by a regal woman Spock learned was Princess Leia Organa of the now-destroyed Alderaan, received them with a mixture of hope and skepticism. "Another Jedi I can accept," Leia said, eyeing Spock curiously. "But a visitor from another universe entirely? This stretches credibility, Commander, even in a galaxy where the Force exists." "I understand your skepticism," Spock replied. "It is the logical response to extraordinary claims. However, my presence here is verifiable through multiple scientific methods, should you wish to investigate further." Mon Mothma, another rebel leader, intervened diplomatically. "What matters is whether you can help us, Commander. The Death Star will be in range of this base within 72 hours. Our analysis of the technical readouts has identified a potential weakness, but exploiting it will be extremely difficult. I have outlined an alternative strategy," Spock said, calling up a holographic display of the Death Star based on the plans the rebels had stolen. A small team could infiltrate the station using a captured Imperial shuttle. Once aboard, they could disable key systems, creating vulnerabilities for your fighters to exploit. General Dodonna studied the display with a veteran's eye. "The approach has merit, but the risk is extraordinary. How would this team avoid detection by Vader? He senses Force users with remarkable accuracy. I can teach Vulcan mental disciplines that shield thoughts from detection," Spock explained. "Not completely, but sufficiently to create confusion and misdirection. Combined with proper timing and distraction, it would allow the team to operate effectively." Debate continued for hours as the full rebel leadership considered the proposal. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The infiltration team would proceed as Spock suggested, while the fighter squadrons prepared for a conventional attack should the covert operation fail. Luke Skywalker, despite his limited training, volunteered immediately for the infiltration team. Kenobi agreed to lead the mission, recognizing that his experience would be crucial. The third member came as a surprise to all. "I volunteer," Princess Leia stated firmly. "I have more knowledge of Imperial protocols than anyone here, and I have personal motivation to see this mission succeed." "Your Royal Highness," one of her advisors objected, "the risk is unacceptable. You are too valuable to the rebellion." Leia's expression hardened. "I watched my entire world die. Billions of lives ended in an instant. I will not stand aside while others take all the risk." Spock recognized the emotional motivation behind her decision but also acknowledged the logical validity of her capabilities. The princess possesses the necessary knowledge and demonstrated courage under pressure. These are valuable assets for such a mission. With the team selected, training began immediately. Spock instructed them in Vulcan meditation techniques, focusing on mental compartmentalization and emotional control. Luke struggled initially, his natural empathy and openness working against the discipline required. Kenobi adapted more readily, his years of Jedi training providing a foundation Spock could build upon. Leia proved surprisingly adept, her natural mental fortitude and determination compensating for her lack of Force sensitivity. "The technique differs fundamentally from Jedi practices," Spock explained as they sat in meditation, "where the Jedi seek to immerse themselves in the Force. This approach creates mental architecture that contains and channels thought patterns. Imagine constructing a series of chambers within your mind, each housing different aspects of consciousness. For 16 hours each day, they trained. Physical conditioning alternated with mental exercises, Spock taught them the basics of the Vulcan nerve pinch, a technique that proved more difficult for humans to master than he had anticipated. Luke managed a partial version after days of practice, enough to temporarily disable an opponent if precisely applied. Kenobi and Leia focused instead on adapting the principles to enhance their existing combat skills. As the deadline approached, tension mounted throughout the base. Engineers worked frantically to modify the captured Imperial shuttle with improved shields and sensors. Intelligence officers prepared falsified clearance codes that might bypass initial security. Medical teams developed specialized equipment to monitor the team's vital signs during the mission, providing early warning of detection or injury. On the final evening before departure, Spock found Luke alone on the temple roof, watching the gas giant Yavin setting behind the jungle canopy. The young man's presence in the Force had grown stronger through their training, his potential still largely untapped. "You appear troubled," Spock observed, joining him at the stone railing. "I'm afraid," Luke admitted without hesitation. "Not of dying, exactly, but of failing. So many people are counting on us." "Fear is a natural biological response to danger," Spock said. "The Vulcan way is not to eliminate such emotions, but to acknowledge them and set them aside through logical analysis." Luke smiled slightly. "Ben says fear is a path to the dark side. An interesting perspective. I would suggest that fear itself is neutral. It is what one does with fear that determines its impact. Logic provides a framework for processing emotion without allowing it to control behavior." "You're not what I expected," Luke said after a moment. "When Ben first told me about you, I thought you'd be some kind of perfect, emotionless being. But that's not it at all, is it? You feel things, maybe even more deeply than humans do. You just have a different way of handling those feelings." "A perceptive observation," Spock acknowledged. "Vulcans chose the path of logic precisely because our emotions run deeper and more powerfully than humans. Without discipline, they would consume us." "Balance," Luke said softly. "That's what Master Yoda kept talking about. Not getting rid of the dark or the light, but finding a way to exist with both in harmony." "A complex philosophical challenge," Spock agreed, "but perhaps one worth pursuing." The infiltration mission launched before dawn. The modified Imperial shuttle rose through Yavin the 4's atmosphere with Kenobi at the controls, Spock monitoring the sensor array he had helped upgrade with Federation-inspired modifications. Luke and Leia completed final equipment checks as they prepared for the hyperspace jump that would take them to the Death Star's current position. "We have approximately 18 minutes after arrival before the Death Star completes its orbit of the nearby moon and has a direct firing solution on Yavin 4. Spock informed them. "The timing of our insertion is therefore critical. The Rebellion will launch their fighter attack as we begin our infiltration," Kenobi added. "The diversion should draw attention away from our arrival." Luke checked his lightsaber, a weapon Kenobi had given him that once belonged to his father. "Once we're aboard, how do we locate the primary control systems?" "Princess Leia has memorized the station schematics," Spock replied. "The optimal targets are the super laser power regulation systems and the main reactor shielding controls. Disabling either will create vulnerabilities the Rebellion fighters can exploit." Hyperspace journey lasted mere minutes, the blue swirl of accelerated space-time giving way to the imposing sight of the Death Star. The massive battle station loomed against the backdrop of stars, its surface covered in lights and structures that gave scale to its enormous size. Spock estimated its diameter at approximately 160 kilometers, making it larger than most natural satellites in the Sol system. A truly remarkable feat of engineering, however morally reprehensible its purpose. "Imperial Shuttle TC-326 requesting docking clearance," Kenobi transmitted, his voice modulated to match Imperial speech patterns. "Priority maintenance crew for Section N8. Tense seconds passed before the response came. TC-326, transmit clearance codes." Leia activated the prepared code sequence. Another wait, this one stretching psychological time beyond physical reality. Spock monitored Imperial communications, prepared to implement countermeasures should their deception be detected. TC-326. You are cleared for approach to Maintenance Bay 12. Proceed on designated vector. The shuttle moved toward the massive structure, now filling their entire field of view. Tractor beams guided them through a magnetic shield into a cavernous docking bay where stormtroopers and maintenance crew moved with practiced efficiency. As they settled onto the deck, Spock activated the final preparations for their infiltration. "Remember your training," he instructed as they donned Imperial uniforms over their combat gear. "Maintain the mental disciplines I have taught you. Focus on the immediate task, compartmentalize emotional responses, project routine thoughts at all times." "What about you?" Luke asked. "You're coming with us, right?" "Negative," Spock replied. "My appearance would immediately trigger suspicion. I will remain with the shuttle, coordinating your movements and preparing for emergency extraction if required." The team exited the shuttle, moving with practiced precision through the inspection process. Spock monitored their progress through concealed communications devices, ready to provide tactical support or distraction as needed. From his position, he could sense the enormous energy of the station, the millions of life forms aboard, and the dark presence that suddenly registered on his awareness. Vader was aboard, his unique force signature unmistakable even at distance. "Exercise extreme caution," Spock transmitted quietly. "Lord Vader is present on the station. His location appears to be the command sector, approximately 6 levels above your current position." The team's acknowledgement came through a subtle comm signal. They continued their approach to the primary control systems, using the access codes Leia had memorized from the stolen plans. The rebel fighters would launch their attack in precisely 12 minutes, creating the diversion needed for the team to access the most sensitive areas of the station. Spock maintained his monitoring position, his mind connected to both the team and the broader situation through a combination of technology and force awareness. The attack began exactly as scheduled, rebel fighters emerging from hyperspace in a coordinated pattern designed to confuse Imperial defenses. Alarms blared throughout the station as troops mobilized to repel the attack. The infiltration team used the confusion to access a restricted turbolift, ascending toward the power regulation center. Then Spock felt it, a disturbance in the force unlike anything he had experienced before. A focused awareness, powerful and dark, turning its attention toward the infiltration team. Vader had sensed them despite their mental shielding. The Dark Lord's presence moved with purpose, converging on the team's position with uncanny accuracy. "You have been detected," Spock transmitted. "Lord Vader approaches your position. Estimated contact in 4 minutes. Proceed to alternate target immediately." The team diverted to their secondary objective, the reactor shielding controls. If they could disable the protective systems around the station's core, the rebel fighters might be able to deliver a critical strike. But time was running short. Spock calculated the probability of mission success, finding it dropping with each passing minute. A logical analysis suggested only one viable course of action. Spock left his monitoring station and moved through the shuttle to the exit ramp. The docking bay remained chaotic as personnel responded to the rebel attack, providing cover for his movement. Using the force techniques Yoda had taught him combined with his Vulcan mental discipline, Spock projected a field of disinterest around himself, causing Imperial troops to look past him as he moved through the station. His tricorder guided him through the labyrinthine corridors, tracking both the team's position and Vader's approach. The Dark Lord would intercept them before they could reach the secondary target, unless Spock provided a diversion. A direct confrontation with Vader would be illogical given the disparity in force abilities and combat experience. However, Spock calculated that his unique mental architecture might confuse the Sith Lord long enough for the team to complete their mission. Vader sensed the approaching presence and paused in his pursuit. This mind was unlike the Jedi he had been tracking, different yet familiar somehow. The Dark Lord turned, lightsaber igniting as Spock rounded the corner and stopped at a calculated distance. "Fascinating," Spock observed, studying the armored figure. "Your respiratory system appears to be primarily mechanical, yet it maintains precise biological support functions. An impressive feat of biomedical engineering." "The Vulcan." Vader recognized him immediately. "You escaped the Emperor only to return to your death. Illogical, even by human standards." "I have found that logic must sometimes accommodate to unique circumstances," Spock replied. "The destruction of an entire planet and its population represents a moral imperative that supersedes personal safety." Vader advanced slowly, saber held ready. "Your Vulcan mind tricks may have confused the Inquisitors, but they will not work on me. I sense the Force within you now. Yoda has trained you. He provided certain insights." Spock acknowledged, "though I found his teaching methods somewhat disorganized compared to Vulcan educational principles." The absurdity of the conversation in the midst of such danger seemed to give Vader pause, exactly as Spock had calculated. The Dark Lord tilted his helmeted head slightly. "You seek to delay me. The others are attempting to sabotage the station." "A logical deduction," Spock conceded. "However, your pursuit presents a decision point. Continue toward them or address the immediate threat I represent." "You?" Something like amusement colored Vader's mechanically filtered voice. "You are no match for the power of the dark side." "Perhaps not," Spock agreed. "But probability suggests I need not defeat you, merely occupy your attention for approximately 7.3 minutes. Vader's response came in the form of a force push that would have thrown any ordinary opponent against the corridor wall with bone-crushing force. Spock had anticipated this, channeling his own force awareness through Vulcan mental techniques to absorb and redirect the energy. He slid backward but remained standing, an outcome that clearly surprised the Sith Lord. "Impossible," Vader stated flatly. No untrained Force user could withstand that attack. "I am finding," Spock replied, "that many things considered impossible merely reflect limited understanding of underlying principles." The lightsaber came next, a sweeping arc of crimson energy that Spock evaded with precise movement. His Vulcan reflexes, enhanced by Force awareness, allowed him to calculate trajectories and respond with minimal wasted motion. He had no illusions about winning this confrontation, but survival for the required time frame remained statistically possible. Vader pressed his attack, lightsaber cutting through the air with increasing speed. Spock maintained defensive positioning, using the station's architecture to limit the Sith Lord's advantages. A fallen conduit provided momentary defense. A narrowing corridor reduced the effectiveness of sweeping attacks. Throughout, Spock monitored the chronometer in his mind. 3 minutes elapsed. 4. The team should be nearing the reactor controls by now. "Your technique is unorthodox," Vader observed during a momentary pause. "Not Jedi, not Sith, yet effective in its way." "I have found," Spock replied, his breathing controlled despite the exertion, "that rigid adherence to established doctrine often limits innovation. The Vulcan way seeks truth through empirical analysis rather than tradition." "The Emperor would find you interesting," Vader said, resuming his advance. "Your mind might still prove valuable to the Empire if you would reconsider your allegiance." "I must decline," Spock responded. "My ethical framework precludes supporting a system that employs planetary destruction as political strategy." The exchange ended as Vader's patience did. The dark side gathered around him visibly, the corridor temperature dropping as he channeled Force energy into a concentrated attack. Spock felt his mental barriers straining against the assault. His body lifted from the ground as invisible pressure constricted around his throat. Fascinating, he thought distantly, how the Force could so directly influence physical matter through sheer will. The pressure released suddenly as alarms blared throughout the station. Emergency systems activated, blast doors beginning to close in response to a critical system failure. The team had succeeded in disabling the reactor shielding. Vader turned his masked face toward distant internal sensors, momentarily distracted by the cascading alerts. Spock used the opportunity to create distance between them, moving quickly through a closing blast door as the station trembled around them. "The reactor shielding has been compromised." Vader's voice carried through the narrowing gap. "It changes nothing. This station is beyond your comprehension. Even without shields, your pitiful rebellion lacks the firepower to threaten us." "Perhaps," Spock acknowledged as the blast door sealed between them. "But I calculate the odds are more favorable than you estimate." Moving swiftly through corridors now filled with rushing personnel, Spock made his way back toward the docking bay. His communicator signaled the team's successful extraction, their return to the shuttle ahead of schedule. The rebel fighters continued their attack, now focusing on a specific weakness identified in the thermal exhaust port that connected directly to the main reactor. With the shielding disabled, a precisely delivered proton torpedo might reach the reactor's core. Spock reached the shuttle moments before the final blast doors sealed the docking bay. Inside, he found Kenobi piloting while Luke and Leia prepared defensive systems. They had encountered resistance but completed their primary objective. Now, escape became the priority as the Death Star's massive defensive batteries turned their attention toward the small craft. "Commander," Kenobi acknowledged as Spock took the co-pilot's position, "your diversion was most effective, though I sense Lord Vader survived the encounter." "That was the expected outcome," Spock confirmed. "A Vulcan places value on all life, even adversaries." The shuttle launched from the docking bay, accelerating away from the Death Star as turbolaser batteries tracked their movement. Behind them, the rebel fighters continued their attack run, following the specific weakness Luke had identified from the plans. A small exhaust port, only 2 meters wide, leading directly to the reactor's core. An almost impossible target under combat conditions. "They'll never make it," Leia said, watching the tactical display as fighter after fighter fell to Imperial defenses. "The port is too small, the defenses too strong. I calculate a probability of success at approximately 3,720 to 1. Spock agreed. "However, improbable does not mean impossible." Luke closed his eyes, focusing as Spock had taught him. "I can feel something, the Force, flowing around us, through us, connecting everything." "Use it," Kenobi encouraged. "Trust your feelings, but focus them through the discipline Spock has taught you. Balance." The shuttle broke free of the Death Star's immediate gravity well, preparing to make the jump to hyperspace. On the tactical display, a single X-Wing fighter made a final approach run, evading defensive fire with seemingly impossible maneuvers. The pilot was strong in the Force, Spock sensed, channeling its energy with remarkable clarity. "He did it," Luke said suddenly. Eyes still closed. "The torpedo is in. They need to get clear, now." The shuttle leapt into hyperspace moments before the Death Star erupted in a massive explosion, the chain reaction reaching the main reactor and releasing energy equivalent to a small stellar event. Through the Force, Spock felt the shockwave of deaths, a psychic tremor similar to what Luke had described feeling when Alderaan was destroyed. Yet unlike that tragedy, this represented a necessary action to prevent further genocide. Their return to Yavin IV was met with celebration tempered by mourning for the pilots lost in the attack. The rebellion had achieved an impossible victory, destroying the Empire's most powerful weapon and giving hope to oppressed worlds across the galaxy. Yet the Empire itself remained, its vast military and political infrastructure still dominating countless systems, one battle won in a war that would continue. In the days that followed, Spock assisted the rebellion with strategic analysis and technical innovations inspired by Federation technology. His understanding of transwarp theory allowed improvements to hyperdrive efficiency. His knowledge of deflector shields enhanced rebel defensive capabilities. Yet, despite these contributions, his thoughts increasingly turned to the question of return. The transporter accident that had brought him here had created a quantum fissure in space-time. If such a fissure could be recreated under controlled conditions, a return passage might be possible. Master Yoda arrived on Yavin 4th as the rebellion prepared to evacuate their base, Imperial retaliation being inevitable. The ancient Jedi sought out Spock immediately, finding him working in an improvised laboratory. "Leaving us, you are considering," Yoda observed without preamble. "My presence here was unintentional," Spock replied. "While I have found the experience scientifically fascinating, I have responsibilities to Starfleet and the Federation." Yoda nodded slowly. "Changed, this galaxy has been, by your coming. Changed you have been, by your time here. The Force, mysterious it remains, even after 900 years of study. I have developed several hypotheses regarding the quantum properties of your Force," Spock said. "It appears to function as a unified field connecting all matter at a subatomic level, accessible to consciousness through biological interfaces you call midi-chlorians. Fascinating from a theoretical physics perspective. More than science it is," Yoda insisted. "Connection, purpose, balance. I do not discount the philosophical implications," Spock acknowledged. "The experience has provided valuable perspective on Vulcan approaches to consciousness and emotion. There are aspects of your Force techniques that might benefit my people, particularly regarding the integration rather than suppression of emotional responses." Kenobi joined them, accompanied by Luke and Leia. "The Empire has dispatched its fleet. We have perhaps 2 days before they arrive in force. The rebellion's evacuation is nearly complete." "And my request?" Spock inquired. "Granted," Leia confirmed. "You'll have the resources you requested to attempt your return journey, though I hope you'll reconsider and stay. The rebellion needs your knowledge, your perspective. I have recorded all relevant technological and strategic insights," Spock assured her, "and I believe you have capable leadership already. Your struggle against the Empire bears many similarities to conflicts the Federation has faced. Logic suggests that determination and adaptability will prove more decisive than any single tactical advantage I might provide." The location Spock selected for his attempt was far from the rebel base, a remote region of Yavin 4 where unusual gravitational harmonics created natural quantum fluctuations. Using components salvaged from his original vessel, combined with technology adapted from both Imperial and Rebel sources, he constructed a device designed to reopen the fissure that had brought him to this galaxy. On the final day, as the Empire's fleet appeared at the edge of the system, Spock's preparations were complete. Luke, Leia, Kenobi, and Yoda gathered to witness the attempt and say their farewells. "The calculations suggest a 73.4% probability of success," Spock informed them. "The quantum signature of my home universe has been isolated. If the fissure opens as theorized, I should be drawn back to approximately the same space-time coordinates from which I departed." "The Force will guide you," Kenobi said. "Though I admit, your scientific approach to what we consider mystical has been refreshing. The Jedi Order might have benefited from such perspective in its prime." "Different paths to understanding," Spock observed, "both valid in their context. The scientific method and your Force's intuitive awareness need not be mutually exclusive approaches." Luke stepped forward, looking more centered and confident than when Spock had first met him. "I'll continue practicing the Vulcan disciplines you taught me. They work well with Ben's Jedi training. Balance, like you said." "A promising approach," Spock agreed. "Your potential is considerable, Mr. Skywalker. I believe you will play a significant role in the events to come." Leia approached next, her regal bearing unchanged despite the losses she had endured. "The rebellion owes you a debt we cannot repay, Commander. Your perspective helped us achieve what seemed impossible." "The destruction of the Death Star was accomplished through collective effort," Spock corrected. "My contribution was merely one factor among many." Yoda was the last to speak, his ancient eyes reflecting wisdom accumulated over centuries. "Remember what you have learned, Spock of Vulcan. Take it with you to your galaxy. Seeds of balance, plant them there. I shall endeavor to integrate these experiences into my understanding, Spock promised. The concept of balance between logic and emotion presents intriguing possibilities for Vulcan philosophy. The device activated with a low hum that gradually increased in pitch and intensity. Energy patterns formed in the air, creating a visible distortion in space-time. Through the force awareness Spock had developed during his time in this galaxy, he sensed the quantum fissure reopening, a pathway forming between universes that should never have connected. Fascinating, Spock observed as the portal stabilized. The quantum signature matches my original entry point with 97% accuracy. Will you remember us? Luke asked. Or will this seem like a dream once you're home? Vulcans do not dream in the human sense, Spock replied, and our memory is precise. This experience will remain with me, as I suspect my presence will leave its mark on your galaxy's development. The portal pulsed, its stability fluctuating. Time was limited. Spock raised his hand in the traditional Vulcan. Salute, live long and prosper. May the Force be with you. As Spock stepped into the quantum fissure, the universes blurred around him. For a moment that existed outside conventional time, he perceived both realities simultaneously, the Enterprise continuing its mission of exploration, the Rebellion fighting against Imperial oppression. Two galaxies, separated by dimensional barriers, yet connected through the experiences of a single consciousness. When awareness returned, Spock found himself in the Enterprise transporter room, exactly 3.7 seconds after the malfunction had occurred. Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy rushed forward, their expressions reflecting human concern that Spock now understood with greater clarity than before. "Spock, are you all right?" Kirk demanded. "The transporter beam collapsed. You vanished for a moment." "I am functional, Captain," Spock replied, stepping down from the transporter pad. "Though I have had a most fascinating experience." "Your readings are all over the place," McCoy said, scanning him with a medical tricorder. "And there's some kind of energy pattern I've never seen before permeating your cellular structure." Spock raised an eyebrow. "Indeed, Doctor. I believe I have much to report. And perhaps much to teach." As they walked from the transporter room, Spock considered the implications of his journey. The Force and Federation science, Vulcan logic and Jedi intuition, discipline and passion in balance rather than opposition. Two galaxies that would never meet, yet now connected through his understanding. The possibilities were, as he would say, fascinating. In a galaxy far, far away, a small group watched the quantum fissure close. The Vulcans' presence had altered their path in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. But the concept of balance he had brought with him would echo through their continuing struggle, a new perspective in a conflict between extremes of light and dark. Luke Skywalker closed his eyes, focusing as Spock had taught him, logic and emotion in harmony, the Force flowing through all things, connecting rather than dividing, balance. With this understanding, perhaps even Darth Vader might be reached. Perhaps even the Emperor could be defeated. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time since Alderaan's destruction, hope felt logical as well as emotional. The stars continued their eternal dance in both universes, separate yet somehow connected through the journey of a single traveler who had bridged worlds through the power of understanding.